Hi everyone, Anthony Morganti here. Many of you probably know that there are multiple versions of Lightroom available from Adobe. The original version of Lightroom is called Lightroom Classic. This is the version of Lightroom that has been available from the beginning. A few years ago, Adobe released some mobile versions of Lightroom, and along with those mobile versions of Lightroom, they released a new desktop version of Lightroom. This version of Lightroom is cosmetically similar to those mobile versions, and it will interface directly with them. For example, you could be editing an image on your iPad and then take up that edit where you left off on this new desktop version without doing anything. The image will automatically sync between all those versions of Lightroom. Adobe, in their infinite wisdom, when they released this version of Lightroom, they called it Lightroom. And then this other version of Lightroom that we always called Lightroom, they renamed this Lightroom Classic. So Lightroom Classic is the original version of Lightroom that has been out since the beginning, and the newer version is called Lightroom. Now, many of us refer to this as the cloud version of Lightroom because your images historically needed to be in the cloud for you to work on them. Well, recently, Adobe added the ability for you to edit images in this version of Lightroom that are local to your hard drive. So you do not have to upload them to the cloud to work on them. You could just go over to this local tab, navigate to where they are on your computer, and start working on them. And that's a great new feature. And because of this new feature, a lot of people are moving over from Lightroom Classic to this version of Lightroom. Unfortunately, this version of Lightroom is missing some of the functionality of Lightroom Classic, and I'm getting a lot of emails from people asking me specific questions that they used to do, things they used to do in Lightroom Classic, asking me, how do you do those things in this version of Lightroom? In many instances, you can't. So in this video, I want to talk about the main differences between the cloud version of Lightroom, that's what I'll call it here, and Lightroom Classic, so that you could make an informed decision of which version is best for you. Now, first of all, as far as like Lightroom Classic, it's a module-based application. You have the library module, develop module, and you have map, book, slideshow, print, and web module. Now, much of the functionality of the library and develop modules in Lightroom Classic is in the cloud version of Lightroom, but everything else, map, book, slideshow, print, and web, they're not available at all in the cloud version of Lightroom. So if you make slideshows, if you make books, if you use the print module, you won't be able to do any of that in the cloud version of Lightroom. Now, for example, I print at home and I download an ICC profile from the paper manufacturer for my specific printer. This ICC profile, when used with Lightroom's print module, will allow Lightroom to control the printer and produce the best possible print for that printer-paper combination. I can't do that at all with the cloud version of Lightroom. As a matter of fact, you can't even print with this version of Lightroom. You're going to have to export the image and use it in another app like Photoshop and print from Photoshop if you do print at home. So for me, I really need the print module. Every now and then I do a slideshow and I'll make a book here and there. I very, very rarely use the map module, and I never use the web module, and I don't think anyone I know uses the web module, so that's not a loss. So if you don't use the map, book, slideshow, print, or web modules, then this version, the cloud version of Lightroom, is for you, probably. But there are some other limitations. Now, as far as the controls, the actual editing is concerned, pretty much everything is there. Some of it's renamed, and it's in different spots. Let's talk about that. First of all, in Lightroom Classic, we have the Basic tab. The Basic tab at the top, you have Auto, Black and White, HDR, and then you have Profiles. Then you have White Balance, Tone, and Presence. Everything in the Basic tab is in this version of Lightroom. It's just renamed or in different spots. There is no Basic tab, right? If you're in the Edit panel, at the top you have Auto, Black and White, HDR, and you have Profiles. Then you have this Light tab. In the Light tab, you have everything that's in the Tone section of the Basic tab. If you go below Light tab and we go to Color, you'll see here is white balance and here are the vibrance and saturation sliders. So white balance here, vibrant saturation at the bottom, they're in that color tab in the other application. Now presence is texture, clarity, and dehaze. Those are in the effects tab, texture, clarity, and dehaze. So everything is there. It's just moved around into different tabs, and some of the tabs are renamed. Now some of the tabs aren't renamed. We have the detail tab, and that's pretty much the detail tab in Lightroom Classic. We have this optics tab, that is lens corrections. That's the same thing, and pretty much all the functionality is there. So you don't have to worry about missing anything there. It's just renamed to optics. Lens blur is lens blur in both apps. Now, taking this a bit further, if we look at the effects tab, you could see here we have texture, clarity, dehaze, vignette, and grain. So in the effects here, we have vignette and grain, but they've added to it the texture, clarity, and dehaze. And also, often with a lot of these tabs in this newer version of Lightroom, the cloud version of Lightroom as I'm referring to it, you'll have to roll things open to get to all the tabs, or to all the controls. So be aware of that. Now there's more here though. We have a tone curve, a color mixer. Inside a color mixer, we have a mixer and point color. And then we have color grading. And then we have transform. And we have calibration. Calibration is not available at all in the cloud version of Lightroom. So most people probably don't do anything here, so you're not going to miss it. But if you do anything in calibration, you will not be able to do those same types of adjustments in the cloud version of Lightroom. Now moving up, we go to the transform tool. If you're an architectural or real estate photographer, you probably go to this tab all the time. Those controls are in this version of Lightroom. They're just in a different spot. They're not under this edit panel. They're in the crop tool. So if we go to the crop tool, it's called geometry. Click on that and you can see all the controls are there and you could do a guided adjustment and so on. So everything is there. It's just under the crop tool. Now, if we go up from that transform tab, we go to, let's say, color grading and color mixer. Those are nested in the color section. So in the color section, we have the color mixer. So this is the HSL tab, which historically was called in Lightroom Classic. Then we have the point color, which is newer, but that's available. And we have color grading. So all that is here. It's just nested in this color section. And tone curve, which has a tab all by itself in Lightroom Classic, that is under the light section. You can see right here, it's called curve, and all the different tone curves are available. All the functionality is there, include targeted adjustments. So you could do all of that here. So the controls are here. They're just moved around a little bit, but you just kind of have to get used to it. Now, as far as other things, all the masking is available. You don't have to worry about any of that. All the healing tools are here. The crop tool's identical. Everything works as far as the crop tool. Cosmetically, it's different, but other than that, the crop tool works the same way. Everything is there for the crop tool. We have presets. If you installed or imported any presets in Lightroom Classic, they should automatically show up in this version of Lightroom. This should automatically be here. If they aren't, you can import them. Go up to File and down to Import Profiles and Presets, and you can import them. So presets are available as well. No big deal. We have the histogram. Same way of getting white and black points. So nothing's changed there. Again, it's just kind of rearranged a little bit. Now, one big thing it's missing is support for plugins. Of course, in Lightroom Classic, you could right-click on an image and go to Edit In, and you could send it to any plugin. Or you could, if you prefer, go to File, down to Plugin Extras, and you could access some plugins that way. Full plugin support in Lightroom Classic. No plugin support in the cloud version of Lightroom at all. Well, I shouldn't say at all. You can send an image to Photoshop. You could right-click on an image and go down to Edit in Photoshop. Now, you may be going, well, share to, add a connection. Can you add it? No, that isn't. That is sending an image to your Adobe portfolio, Blurb, Cintiq, something SmugMug, stuff like that. So nothing to do with plugins. So there are workarounds. I mean, you could edit the image outside of the cloud version of Lightroom in the plugin first, then just navigate to it where it is locally on your hard drive with the local tab and take up your edit here. But it is, kind of clumsy in that if you're a big user of plugins, you'll be disappointed in no plugin support in this version of Lightroom. Also, there's no tethering support. So if you tether, those of you that don't know what it is, it's when you have your camera hooked up to your computer directly. Most often you'll do this in a studio setting, and you'll be taking photographs, and those photographs will automatically load into Lightroom, and sometimes you'll have like a preset being added to that image as it's being loaded automatically in Lightroom. There's no tethering support at all here as well. Now, as far as library module functionality, if we go over to the library module of Lightroom Classic, like here I could rename an image. I could just go and while I'm in the library module, hit the F2 key, and I could rename it. You can't rename any images in the cloud version of Lightroom at all. What else? There's different views in Lightroom Classic. We have like a grid view, we have a loop view, we have a compare view, we have a survey view, and we have this last one, a people view. I'm not going to click on that one though. So we have these different views. You don't have as many views in the other version or the cloud version of Lightroom. You do have two different types of grid views. You have this one grid view that is like rectangles, and then you have this other grid view which is a square, so it kind of fits your image in a square. And in this grid view, you could see the star ratings or the color labels. Then you do have one compare view. That's it. So there isn't a survey view at all. And then you have, this is called the detail view. They call that here. Whereas in Lightroom Classic, when you're in the library module, they call that the loop view. So renamed it for whatever reason. So some of the views aren't there. Now there are star ratings and there are flags. So you give it a pick flag or a reject flag, you give it a star rating. Of course, in Lightroom Classic, you could do that. But in Lightroom Classic, you could also give it color labels. Color labels are not available in the cloud version of Lightroom. There is one way to copy images from one image to another. You could click this little gear and you could say exactly what you want copied from one image to the other. And then you could copy the settings from one to another. In Lightroom Classic, there's a number of different ways. You could select more than one image in the film strip, turn this little switch on, and then any edit you do to one will automatically be done to all the other images that are selected. Conversely, you can just click on one image, then select other images and click on sync, and you could come in and, not in the develop module. Click on one image, click on the other image, then click on sync, and then you could synchronize specific settings like you can in the cloud version of Lightroom. And you can just edit an image, then click on another image, and then click previous and copy all the edits you just did to the first image onto the second image. So that's another way. So there's a little more versatility there. Now, to kind of go hand in hand with printing, often with printing, you're going to create a soft proof first, and on Lightroom Classic, you hit the S key and create a soft proof. This will help you make sure that your colors are in gamut for the printer and ink and stuff that your paper that you're using. And again, these ICC profiles come into play here. There's really none of that functionality here in the cloud version of Lightroom. So there is no soft proofing at all in the cloud version of Lightroom. Let's see, what did I miss? I know I'm missing something. Oh, I know, importing and exporting. When you import, let's say right now on my desktop or on my computer, I have an SD card plugged in. And in Lightroom Classic, I could bring up the import module. And the only way you could get images into Lightroom Classic is you have to import them. So you have to go through this import process. There's a lot of functionality here. You could copy them from the SD card and then put them to a very specific destination on your computer, on your system. During this copy process, you could build smart previews. You could build different types of previews. You could tell it not to import suspected duplicates. You can make second copies. You could add it to a collection. You could rename them. You could apply develop presets to the image. You could apply metadata presets to the image as they're being imported. You could add keywords to the image as they're being imported. Great, right? A lot of functionality. But the downside is with Lightroom Classic is you cannot just navigate to where images are on your computer and start working on them. You have to import them. This version of Lightroom, the cloud version of Lightroom, is a little different. You don't have to import at all. You just click local. You could just navigate to where they are on your computer, go into browse, going on one of your external hard drive, whatever. Just navigate to where your images are and you can start working on them. Now, a downside of this is like if you click on like an image, see how it's pixelated? You have to wait for it to build the preview. So it's going to take a second or three. And it's taken quite a while with this one. This is a Sony 60 megapixel camera. So it's a pretty large RAW file. So it takes a while to kind of do that preview. These ones I must have did already. You see how they rendered a lot faster. So you do have to wait a little bit, but you don't have to go through that whole import process. Now, on the other hand, you can like import images, but it's kind of useless. You could go up to File, and you could go down to, well, we don't want to do that. If we go to the cloud, there we go, and we go to File, then we go to Add Photos. This is where you'll be actually adding the photos to the cloud. They'll be accessible in this version of Lightroom, but they'll also be accessible then on the mobile versions of Lightroom. So if you use it on your smartphone or your tablet, you'll be able to access the images there. But when you do it this way and you click Add Images, if you navigate, I'm already on my SD card and I select all the images, right, that I wanted to accidentally click. But let's say I just then click Review for Import. It actually doesn't move them anywhere. They stay on the SD card. So what you need, there's really, don't confuse this with importing. That's why I think Adobe didn't call this import. They called it add. So what you need to do is if you do have the images on a memory card from your camera, plug the camera and or memory card into your computer, then outside of Lightroom, take those images off that memory card and put them somewhere where you want them on your computer in a specific folder on your system. Then if you don't want them in the cloud, just access them with the local tab and navigate to where they are and start working on them. If you do want them in the cloud, so they're backed up, and you could edit them on mobile devices if you want to, in that case, then go up to File, Add Photos. And that way you'll be able to add them to the cloud automatically. You can add them as you go. You could see right here, I have one image here clicked. I could copy this one photo to the cloud, or I could select multiple images in the film strip and click here. Well, it's not doing it, but it should actually do more than one. I'm not sure why it's not allowing me, but typically you would be able to add more than one just by selecting them in the film strip and then clicking here and adding them all. But I'm not sure. I know I've done it in the past, so I'm probably doing something wrong. Anyone knows what I'm doing wrong, let me know in the comments below, because off the top of my head, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So that is as far as importing. Now, as far as exporting is concerned, of course, in Lightroom Classic, if you bring up the export dialog box, you have a lot of functionality here, where you're going to save it, how you're going to rename it. You can work with video. You have file settings. You could go with the JPEG, JPEG XL, AVIF, PSD, TIFF, PNG, DNG, or the original image. You could resize it. You could do output sharpening, decide what metadata you want to include with it, do watermarking. And then after you're done editing or exporting it, do you want to show it in Finder? What do you want to do with it from that point? Usually nothing. You also have some export presets here. So if I am exporting an image that I want to put on my website, I could just click here and it will automatically put these settings over here that I need for my website. If I'm sending it to Instagram, I could click there and it will automatically do the settings I need for Instagram and so on. So you could do export presets. So there's a lot of versatility and capability with the export dialog in Lightroom Classic. Now, conversely, over in this version of Lightroom, you have some of it, but not all of it. If we go to the export thing here in the top right-hand corner, there's a little icon. Click on it, and you can see that there are some presets, JPEG small, JPEG large, the original image, or you could go to previous settings for some reason. But let's just go to custom settings. When you do that, it will open up in this dialog. And on the right-hand side, you could see that you have these presets you could still access, or you could go to a JPEG, TIFF, JXL, AVIF, DNG, or the original image. Dimensions, you could go small, full size, or custom. If you're custom, you can choose, what size you want, the quality. Now, of course, this will change depending on what image type you're choosing. For example, if you have a TIFF, you're going to have like bit depth and compression, transparency, watermark, and so on. So you have some different settings. You could include all the metadata or just your copyright. You could rename it, right? Below that, you could do output sharpening. So you could sharpen for screen standard or something like that. So you could do that. You could then pick your color space right here and then export your one photo. So you could, once you do this, let's say I just like these settings here and I export this, it will ask me where, and then I could do it to the desktop. So that's that. Nothing really, it's a little simpler, but it has really everything you need here for most of your exports. If you're doing something exotic with exporting that you do over here in Lightroom Classic, you won't be able to do it over here in the cloud version of Lightroom. Now, last thing I want to talk about very quickly is if I go over here, let's talk about collections. In Lightroom Classic, you have collections, and you could have a group of collections in a collection set. And you also have something called Smart Collections. Smart Collections is something where you set up where you could say like all 3-star images with a red color label are going to be added to this specific collection. So that's called a Smart Collection. Smart Collections are not available at all in the cloud version of Lightroom. Collections are, but again, Adobe in their infinite wisdom, instead of just calling them collections, they called them albums. So albums in Lightroom for the cloud are the same thing as collections in Lightroom Classic. Now, collection sets are when you have more than one collection grouped together in a set. Those are available in the cloud version of Lightroom, but they're called folders. So in the cloud version of Lightroom, you could have a folder, and inside of that folder, you could have another folder, and inside of that folder, you could have 3 albums. Whereas a similar thing in Lightroom Classic would be a collection set. Inside of that collection set, you'd have another collection set. Inside of that collection set, you could have another collection set. And inside of that collection set, you could have 3 collections. So same functionality, just named differently. Now, for example, if I wanted to create an album with my grandson in it, right, I could just click this little plus sign and create an album. And I'll just call this Hudson. That's his name, right? And I'm not going to include this 2 selected photos because somehow I have 2 selected down there and I don't want both in there. So I'm just going to click create. So I have this this album called Hudson. So I will then just take his image and just drag it and drop it in that album. So it's just like a collection in Lightroom Classic. Same thing. Now, if I want to put this in a set, it's called a folder. So I would go up here, click plus, and I would create folder. And I'm going to call this folder family. All right. So we click create. Now we take this Hudson album and I'll drag it up into family. And now it's inside of there. So same functionality. They just changed the names for whatever reason. I'm not really sure why. So the bottom line is if you really just edit images and you don't do anything else, like you don't really print, like high-end print, you send it off to a lab, you send a JPEG off to a lab, you don't need the print module in Lightroom Classic, right? You don't need any of that. This version of Lightroom is probably the best bet for you. Pretty much everything you need to edit is here. But if you do anything else like slideshows, books, more advanced printing, specific types of plug-in things you use, you're going to need this Lightroom Classic as opposed to this version of Lightroom. So hopefully that made sense. I kind of got lost halfway through, tell you the truth. This is probably one of the worst videos I ever made. I apologize for that, but hopefully it somehow helps you decide which version of Lightroom is best for you. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon.